Today on the AI Breakdown, OpenAI puts a cap on an extremely busy week that sees updates around their alignment efforts, improvements for developers, and the forthcoming release of the most anticipated ChatGPT plugin yet. Welcome back to the AI Breakdown. Today we are going through all of OpenAI's recent announcements, and boy have there been quite a few. And although we've covered it in the show, I want to make note of the fact that they kicked this week of announcements off with their Superalignment announcement. Now, if you haven't watched my video or listened to my podcast about this topic, long story short, OpenAI has announced a new initiative that is focused on alignment with super intelligent AI systems. The big banner headlines around this announcement are: 1, they're putting extremely senior members of their team to lead it, including a co-founder. 2, they're putting 20% of the computing power that they've secured to this effort, despite the fact that they have said explicitly that lack of access to all of the compute that they want has led them to change their feature roadmap for 2023. And 3, that their goal is to solve super intelligent alignment within 4 years. Now, if you want the whole story, obviously go check out the other show. But what captured people about this was the fact that OpenAI was so clear about the challenges and that they gave themselves specific goals that could be held against them, basically. In other words, they didn't have to say that they wanted to solve this in 4 years, but they did. And so now, at every point between here and then, people are going to say, well, how much progress are we making towards that 4-year goal? They also put a specific number around the resources that they're going to dedicate to this effort, which is, again, something that people can determine if they're actually living up to their promises. The last piece that I want to note is in the context of the other press announcements this week. This was the first thing they announced this week, and I think that that was very intentional. There's a pretty good chance that if they had announced their GPT-4 developer access first, it would have slightly overwhelmed this news, and it is almost certainly the case that if they had led with Code Interpreter, that would be what everyone was focused on. It strikes me as pretty clear that they wanted to give this Superalignment team announcement its own time in the sun. But as I said, it was certainly not the only announcement this week, and the next big one has to do with what is available through the OpenAI API. TLDR, all paying API customers now have access to GPT-4. OpenAI says that since March, when GPT-4 was released, millions of devs have requested access to its API. Today, they write, all existing API developers with a history of successful payments can access the GPT-4 API with 8K context. We plan to open up access to new developers by the end of this month, then start raising rate limits after that depending on compute availability. Now, while the GPT-4 announcement was the big one, they also announced that they'd be making the GPT 3.5 Turbo models, DALL-E models, and Whisper APIs also generally available. Lastly, they said, we're working on safely enabling fine-tuning for GPT-4 and GPT 3.5 Turbo and expect this feature to be available later this year. Now, for some, it was this little detail in that last sentence that was most exciting. Matt Schumer, the CEO at Hyperride AI, says, GPT-4 fine-tuning is coming later this year. This is a bigger deal than most people realize. A fine-tuned GPT-4 will be able to do tasks that GPT-4 can barely touch today. Potentially more important, it'll enable far better reliability on tasks GPT-4 can do unreliably today. Lastly, for devs, they also announced a number of deprecations, as well as a new community resource where people can ask questions about model and endpoint deprecations as well. Still, all of this was prelude to what was the biggest bit of news, which is that Code Interpreter will be made available to all ChatGPT Plus users over the next week. Now, in their tweet, OpenAI says it lets ChatGPT run code, optionally with access to files you've uploaded. You can ask ChatGPT to analyze data, create charts, edit files, perform math, etc. Users opt in via settings. Code Interpreter was first revealed as part of the plugins announcement. When OpenAI shared that they were opening up ChatGPT for third-party plugins, there were 2 that they were working on in-house. The first was a browsing feature, which later became Browse with Bing, and the second was Code Interpreter. Even though only a very small number of people had access to it, within days, those who did were showing off some pretty incredible use cases. David Boyle, for example, shared a spreadsheet of music data with ChatGPT, from which it segmented a number of different music markets and came up with business strategies for each segment. Code Interpreter could be used to visualize data. For example, Professor Ethan Mollick uploaded a set of data around all the lighthouses in the US and then had Code Interpreter create a GIF of them twinkling. Another viral example of using Code Interpreter for visualization came from John Backus, who wrote on April 29th, "The Code Interpreter feature on ChatGPT is the most mind-blowing thing I've seen yet. All I did was upload a CSV of SF crime data and ask it to visualize trends." Some of the things that Code Interpreter came back with were number of incidents by day of the week, hourly crime trends in terms of when crimes took place specifically, top crime categories, and a heat map of crime hotspots in San Francisco. Finally, one of the things that people have found is that you can just ask Code Interpreter to come up with its own interesting hypotheses based on data. In other words, you don't even have to tell it exactly what you want. You can just feed it some data and tell it you want something interesting. On May 2nd, Professor Ethan Mollick wrote a piece on his blog called "It's Starting to Get Strange." In it, he describes Code Interpreter as GPT-4 with 3 new capabilities. The AI can read files you upload up to 100 megabytes, it can let you download files, and it lets the AI run its own Python code. This may not seem like a huge advance, he says, but in practice, it is pretty stunning. And it works incredibly well without any technical knowledge or ability. Describing more of this program that builds programs, as he puts it, he describes a number of his early experiments. One example prompt was, quote, "I'm writing a blog post about how amazing ChatGPT is at working with code right now. I would like you to create the perfect illustration, a GIF using Python that represents this ability. Decide what an appropriate amazing GIF would be and then figure out how to create it and let me download it." Sure enough, a few minutes later, he had his GIF. He also uploaded Excel files without providing any context and asked things like, "Can you do visualizations and descriptive analyses to help me understand the data? Can you try regressions and look for patterns? Can you run regression diagnostics?" He even uploaded the entire US Census dataset and asked the AI to explore it, generate its own hypothesis based on it, conduct hypothesis tests, and write a paper based on the results. Mollick said that it tested 3 different hypotheses with regression analysis, found that one was supported, and ultimately wrote an academic paper about it called "Regional Dynamics of Industry Characteristics, a comprehensive examination of payroll, employment, and establishments across metropolitan and micropolitan areas." Mollick said it is not a stunning paper, but it took just a few seconds and it was completely solid. Now here we are a couple months later, and Ethan has written a follow-up post called "What AI Can Do with a Toolbox: Getting Started with Code Interpreter." Ethan writes, "Everyone is about to get access to the single most useful, interesting mode of AI I have ever used, ChatGPT with Code Interpreter." The way that he describes Code Interpreter now is saying, it gives the AI a general-purpose toolbox to solve problems by writing code in Python, a large memory to work with, and integrates that toolbox into the AI in ways that play to the strengths of large language models. This, he says, helps address a number of problems that previous ChatGPT had. Some of those problems include allowing AI to do math, lowering hallucination rates, making the AI more versatile, and one more that's much more subjective. Mollick writes, "It gives you more of those AI moments. Anyone who has worked with GPT-4 has probably encountered at least a few moments where it felt like there really was indeed a ghost to the machine. I know it is an illusion that LLMs are in no way sentient or thinking, but those moments are a thrilling and sometimes unnerving glimpses of possible futures with smarter AIs. Code Interpreter provides the most that's weird moments per use of any AI system I have played with." Concluding, he says that Code Interpreter is a sign of things to come. He says Code Interpreter is the strongest case yet for a future where AI is a valuable companion for sophisticated knowledge work. Things that took me a week to master in my PhD were completed in seconds by the AI, and there were generally fewer errors than I would expect from a human analyst. Human supervision is still vital, but I would not do a data project without Code Interpreter at this point. But it is just as clear to me that humans are not going to be replaced by Code Interpreter. Instead, the AI does what we always hope automation will do: free us from the most annoying, repetitive parts of our job so we can focus on the good stuff. By simplifying the process of analysis, I can do more and deeper and more satisfying work. My time becomes more valuable, not less, as I can concentrate on what is important rather than the rote. Code Interpreter represents the clearest positive vision so far of what AIs can mean for work. Disruption, yes, but disruption that leads to better, more meaningful work. I think it is important for all of us to think about how we can take the same approach to other jobs that will be impacted by AI. I think it's fair to say at this point that Code Interpreter is the most anticipated product that ChatGPT has ever had. For months, we've been getting these little dribbles of what seem like amazing use cases, and I know many people have, like me, even gone out and looked for alternatives to use in the meantime because of seeing what's possible and wanting to be able to do that in our own context and work. We are going to have a lot more time to dig into Code Interpreter when it becomes available. Obviously, I will be doing some experiments and sharing them with you here. But for now, this was a pretty exciting announcement and one which I am thrilled to see play out next week. Thanks for hanging out and watching or listening to the AI Breakdown. Until next time, peace.